Sanford Stadium is one of the toughest environments in college football. That was Chris Fowler, Disney and ABC ESPN's lead broadcaster. That was his takeaway from the kickoff of Georgia Tennessee. And then Paul Feinbaum soon thereafter, after the Dawgs whipped the Vols 31-17, had to say that there's no shame in losing to Georgia. Of course, he added that the Dawgs have lost a couple games themselves. I agree with both those things. I think Georgia has come a long, long way in its environment, its atmosphere, and so forth. And it still has some things that it can pick up on and learn. But when you watch visually what we saw in the stadium, but even more on television, which I'd not seen the television copy until Sunday. Oh, that was Monday. Sorry, I had a lot going on Sunday. The fireworks, the entire stadium being in black, the red of the student section. I thought it was a fabulous showcase for what Georgia is as well as what it can be. When Chris Fowler talks about it's one of the toughest stadiums to play in the country, one of the toughest environments, it's not always been that way. Okay. It's not always been that way. And I well remember when it was not that way in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the a lot of the 2000s, not all of the 2000s. There's an explanation for that. If you want to stick with me on this, I can explain it to you. But because there's an explanation doesn't mean that it should stay that way. And Georgia's doing all it can do right now to elevate its end game. Now think about in the last 7 years. 7 years, is that right? Let's just say 10. Greg McGarity did a great job of recognizing one of Georgia's problems. Greg McGarity was athletic director from 2010 until 2020. He hired Kirby Smart to be the head coach at Georgia. One of the things that he did was he brought in something called the McGill Society, and that allowed people to give more money over a longer period of time. It allowed Georgia to raise money in a way that made them not have to go borrow money with bonds and so forth, less explaining to the Board of Regents. And so Georgia just sort of took off in terms of fundraising from that point forward. Well, the McGill Society gave Georgia a way to get in with alcohol sales. And then they slowly built that into the game as well. And you look at what Josh Brooks, the current athletic director at Georgia, he has been a facilities person his entire tenure not his entire tenure, but the bulk of his expertise has been in facilities. So all the stuff around Sanford, that's what they took the money from McGill and made it nicer. They took the money from McGill and other donors to build I think it was $60 million bridge end zone project, the locker room. There's all sorts of stuff around Sanford Stadium. It's so much nicer, but it's all the other stuff that now you're seeing on the field. Georgia has chosen to make it a very difficult place to play. When Greg took over, Georgia was a good team. Kirby came in, Greg hiring Kirby. Kirby comes in. A year later, Georgia's lost, I think Georgia's only lost one home game since 2017, which is 2019 South Carolina. So a lot of it is the team that's on the field. Okay, that's the vast majority of it. But you don't just get false starts without the crowd. In order for the crowd to get whipped up, you need environment. You can choose to make environment a big deal. So whereas Georgia is still not as good as, to me, LSU, South Carolina, Neyland Stadium, and Auburn. Auburn does better than everybody for what they have. But Georgia's come a long way in this. It used to be not good. I would go so far as to say it was bad. And when I say used to be, definitely in the 90s, it was bad. In the 2000s, it wasn't great. Now, there's an explanation for that. Chris and Kirk Herbstreit have been coming to Georgia. Certainly, Chris has been coming to Georgia for a while now. Because of the situation with the broadcasting rights, Kirk has only been around not as often because he's typically doing the big Disney game. And for a long time, that was not the Georgia game. Okay, so they would go to the Big Ten, or they would go to the ACC or the Big 12, Pac-12, whatever. Now they're going to be in Athens a lot. And you're going to see more and more and more people commenting on where Georgia's at and so forth. And this is a huge competition, don't get me wrong. But for all that time that I'm talking about, Georgia's never played their biggest game in Athens, and they never will, which is Florida. The Auburn game is a huge game, which is every other year. The Tennessee game is a huge game, but that's every other year. So whereas Auburn and Tennessee now are stacked together, we don't know what that will be like in the future. But Georgia Tech, one of Georgia's three rivals, so Georgia has three rivals. They have Auburn, Tech, and the Gators, okay? Then they play other big games. They play Texas, they play Tennessee, they play Alabama, and they're going to play more and more of those games. They're just not going to play those teams every single year necessarily. They will always play Tech. They will always play Florida. They will probably always play Auburn. Because of the way things are set up, Georgia doesn't get those huge games at home often. And if you think about it, I don't know if Clemson is a huge, huge game the same way that like Tennessee, Alabama, and LSU are, but they're definitely very close. They've not played Clemson in Athens in 10 years. Okay? They're probably not going to play Clemson in a few years. I don't know, but we'll see. But the atmosphere growing at Georgia is not by accident. I think not that it wasn't a wake-up call with the Auburn game earlier this year, but I think that if you go on the road, most of y'all don't go to road games. I go to every one of them. And if you step back and look at where Georgia was at versus where they needed to go, they weren't there yet. The Auburn game was a great example of how crowds can get lulled to sleep, even in a rivalry game. That didn't happen against Tennessee. And there were a couple things. You could see it a week later immediately with Mississippi State after the Auburn game. But with the Tennessee game, Georgia had about 5 weeks to get ready, and they got ready. The going into the fourth quarter was electric, as usual, but even more so, the fireworks after the touchdowns. All that stuff, they've never done that before, the fireworks. They've never, the killing of the lights, it's challenging as a photographer, but that red glow. This is a show. If you don't know it already, this is a show. This is a television show. The University of Georgia's athletics department is a television show. And their TV show involves characters from other television shows. It's like, in the 80s or whenever Friends would get on the ER in the 90s. Stuff like that. That's what this is. Now, people don't realize that, but this is a show. This is entertainment. And in today's America, you got to give people entertainment. You've got to entertain people. This right now, this is informative, but it's entertainment. And we understand that. Even though we're journalists and we take that seriously, we understand that you have to give sizzle, not just steak. Georgia's gotten that too. And when Chris Fowler starts talking about this is one of the toughest environments, it is. But it's become that way because of two things. A, Georgia's gotten better because of Kirby. But it was tough under Mark Richt too when Mark had really good teams. Ask LSU, ask Auburn, all right? Ask Tennessee. It's hard to play at Sanford Stadium. It's just become more difficult because the teams are better, A, and then B, they're creating atmosphere. Now, I do want to go on this soapbox just for a second, okay? So hang in here. But every game is not a superlative. This was not the loudest game that I've ever been to at Georgia. It was not the wildest environment that I've ever been to at Georgia. And I'm going to talk about this just for a few minutes because I feel like this needs to be talked about. Because if you only go to so many games, if you're under 20, then you don't have the perspective that I've got. A lot of people have always talked about the year before I was born in 1976 when Georgia beat Alabama in Athens, and they, went to the Alabama hotel and all that stuff. But and I'm sure that was a great moment, a great thing. There's no way that was louder because there were 40,000 fewer people in the stadium. But I know that was a big deal game. Okay. The big moments in time at Georgia are as follows, and I'm going off the top of my head. Okay, 2004 LSU was a huge game. It was very, very loud. The crowd was definitely into it. LSU brings something out in Georgia. I don't know. 2007 blackout, Auburn. That was wild. That was it's always going to be up there. It always will be up there. That game was something else. Okay. And I don't want to skip over any. So you got that game. Then you got 2013 LSU. That game before Zach Bettenberger had his last throw, and Leonard Pope and Jordan Jenkins. Jordan, if you want to come on. Leonard, if you want to come on, let me know. My cell phone has not changed. I don't know if y'all's has. I can text y'all. But we can talk about that game. But when Zach dropped back on 4th down, 3rd down, and they had some players on that LSU team. Those receivers were sick. And Zach was pretty good too. That sound of that game, because it was do or die for Georgia. They had lost to Clemson up there. That's the last time they lost to Clemson that long ago. But they beat top 5 Carolina. They lost to top 10 Clemson. They beat top 5 Carolina, and then they beat top 5 LSU. Certainly top 10 LSU. That was the start of their season in 2013, and then everybody got hurt. Okay, so but that crowd that night, that was crazy. That was serious. And then you got to kind of fast forward to 2019 in Notre Dame. That game was very special, but the atmosphere was almost completely organic. Georgia's not doing organic anymore. They're saying we're forcing the issue, which I think is really good because organic's going to get there. They're getting paid media now. Like, they want it. It's smart. So you got those games, and you lead up to 2019 Notre Dame. And then, obviously, COVID was bad. And then I would say this. 21 Arkansas for a noon game, I've never seen it like that at Georgia before. It just hasn't happened, okay? And in that year, you had a pretty tight adjacent game against South Carolina in 21 in the first half. Then you had, after that, you had the Kentucky game in Athens. So you had some, fights in Athens at the time. But the 21 Arkansas was when everybody, all the dads, they drank the Kool-Aid. They were completely in. They could feel it. They knew something big was happening. There was a lot of angst because it wouldn't be a Georgia football game without angst about JT not playing and Stetson taking over at the time. Stetson played well. He didn't ball out, but he played well. And then, you can't ignore 2022 Tennessee. That game was wild. It got louder as the game drew on, and there was rain. So the students brought it hard. I think the dads brought it in 21 at Arkansas, but the students brought it legit in 22 Tennessee. 22 Tennessee is one of the few games that you probably will always remember. But I will tell you this, just from my perspective, and it wasn't loud, and it wasn't a consequential win. It wasn't anything like that. But 2021 Charleston Southern was the end of the innocence, okay? It was the last time that Georgia played in that stadium without being a national champion for an extended period of time. And that day, Charleston Southern was the culmination of the career of James Cook, Zamir White, all those guys that were in that group, Jordan, Devontae. This was a great older group of guys, and Jordan Davis's touchdown was an amazing. That's like Refrigerator Perry scoring a touchdown. That was a cultural phenomenon. And then to go be with the Redcoats. Hey, Redcoats, get out of the way when we're coming through at the half, by the way. Like, clear a path, all right? People are using that tunnel. Clear out of the way. Everybody loves you. Clear out of the way. So when Jordan was there with the band and the Georgettes and the flag corps and all that, the Redcoats have a particular tie that other people don't with the team. And they can affect the game in a way that other people can't because they have instruments and they're playing music. They can do things. You know their songs. You can hear them. Georgia on My Mind, or, all of the third down songs, and I don't want to say them wrong, so I'm choosing not to say them. But all of that stuff goes into what Chris Fowler was talking about. And other places have great stuff too. LSU's band is outstanding. Tennessee's band is outstanding. There are some really good bands in the SEC. Georgia, for me, is better in the stands than they are on the field, but I don't hang out at halftime a lot, so that's me. But, all of this stuff is a part of the entertainment. And, I'm just telling you, Tennessee, their band does an outstanding job of working with what they got. And they got Rocky Top. And they've got, the Darth Vader, the Imperial March, excuse me. They have Georgia goes with Lord of the Rings. They go with Bad Leroy Brown, Jim Croce. There's a lot of stuff that Georgia has the ability to, they could do lights the night the lights went out in Georgia. There's a lot of stuff the Redcoats can do that other bands can't, because no one writes songs about South Carolina or Florida, unless it's Jimmy Buffett. And are you really going to do that? So there's a lot of stuff the Redcoats can do, but all of that ties in. The swag surfing, the cheerleaders are doing a better job. Calling the dogs between, all that stuff adds up. And if you're Nico or you're Jalen Milroe's never played at Georgia. He doesn't know what it's like to deal with Sanford. Okay, breathing on top of them. An Alabama team has not come here since Kirby was an assistant there 10 years ago. So that will be wild when Texas comes, but Alabama will be the game that people will go nuts over. I know how this goes. It's what it'll be, and that's what it is. That'll be a night game. It'll probably be in September. It'll probably be announced on Good Morning America and all this stuff. I mean, you're talking about big brands here. But all that is what, Kirby, but it's really up to Josh Brooks and his group to say, hey, what do we need to do right now that will help us help our team? I just get the number just now. I don't think I can put this on the screen, but I'm gonna try. That is a massive number. That is the most watched Tennessee-Georgia game ever. I cannot do it. 10 million viewers for Georgia-Tennessee. I mean, that's just striking. That's an amazing accomplishment for what Georgia and Disney and all them. I mean, you can't see it. Oops. Well, I'll try, but you can't quite say that. Oh, that left over there. 10 million viewers watched that game. That's another 10 million viewer game for Georgia this season. I don't know how many it is. I think Georgia, Bama, Georgia, Tennessee. Like Georgia, Clemson was like 8 million. I mean, Georgia's going to be the most watched team this season. I didn't think they would, because you still got Ohio State, Michigan. That game's not going to draw like Georgia's had all these games to draw. Florida, LSU, 6 million, almost 5 million for Texas, Arkansas. Nobody cares about Arkansas. 5 million people watching. Oh, it's 4.6, whatever. And then you got 6 million watching the Gators and LSU. But 10 million people watching Georgia, Tennessee is the most by millions. That is the most by millions that this game has ever been. And they got to see a huge show, man. That's a big deal. And you're going to see this Disney deal. The money is not quite the way it should be. Disney's underpaying, but the exposure has been something else. But when these guys talk about it's an intimidating place to play, it's one of the toughest atmospheres, it's going to get worse. They're going to work on this. They got a whole season, basically. I deal with UMass and Tech. Tech will get the same treatment Tennessee did. But when Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss come next year, that's going to be a whole pirate show there. It's going to be a whole deal when they come to town. Thanks for watching.